You know that feeling when you think you know someone, but then you find out they've been hiding something huge the whole time? That's what happened with Phyllis Diller. She was one of the funniest women who ever lived. Millions of people watched her on TV, listened to her albums, and laughed at her wild jokes. But nobody knew that every single week for more than 30 years, she would get in her car and drive to the same place. A place she never talked about on stage. A place her fans didn't even know existed. Inside those walls was someone she loved more than anyone else in the world. Someone she couldn't talk about, couldn't joke about, couldn't even mention. And when those weekly visits finally stopped in 1993, her heart shattered into pieces she could never put back together. What Phyllis was hiding explains so much about her life. It explains why she never stopped working, even when her own heart literally stopped beating. It explains the pain behind her famous laugh. And it explains why, even at 95 years old, she was still fighting to keep going. This is the story of what Phyllis Diller never wanted you to know. Let me take you back to where it all started. Phyllis Diller was born on July 17, 1917, in a small town called Lima, Ohio. Right from the beginning, her life was different. Her parents were really old compared to other parents back then. Her dad, Perry, was 55 years old and her mom, Frances, was 36. That might not sound weird now, but back in 1917, that was super unusual. Because her parents were older, Phyllis grew up around elderly people all the time. And here's the strange part. She went to a lot of funerals as a little girl. Most kids would be scared of death and sad things like that. But Phyllis? She became fascinated by it. Not in a creepy way, but in a curious way. She started thinking about dark topics when she was really young. And you know what? That weird comfort she had with sad and dark things became the secret ingredient in her comedy later on. She could joke about stuff other people were afraid to even talk about. Her family was Methodist and they had German and Irish roots. But even as a kid, Phyllis decided religion wasn't for her. She faced hard times early in life, but instead of becoming angry and bitter like some people do, she became funny. When she went to Central High School in Lima, she would crack jokes with her classmates outside of class. Those little moments of making people laugh, they were just the beginning of something much, much bigger. Then the Great Depression hit America in the 1930s. You've probably learned about this in school. It was a time when millions of families lost everything. Phyllis's family got crushed financially. They had no money. So young Phyllis started selling newspapers on the street just to help her family survive. Every paper she sold, every penny she made, it was building a tough shell around her heart. A shell she would need desperately later in life. Here's something wild. Her family's last name used to be Triber, but it got changed generations before she was born. She didn't even know about it until she was an adult. Growing up in a quiet house that often felt lonely, Phyllis started making up stories in her head. And pretty soon those stories started sounding like jokes and punchlines. Now here's where things get really interesting. When Phyllis was just 10 years old in 1927, she got accepted into the Sherwood Music Conservatory in Chicago. That's a really prestigious music school. Her piano skills were incredible, way beyond what you'd expect from a kid her age. By 1939, she was actually playing piano professionally with orchestras. Can you imagine? A girl from a small town in Ohio playing with real orchestras. But then she did something shocking. She quit, just walked away from it all. Not because she wasn't talented. Not because people told her she was bad. But because deep down she believed she would never be as good as her teachers. It broke her heart to make that choice. But something inside her knew that music wasn't her true path. The Great Depression made everything even harder. In 1933, when Phyllis's family completely ran out of money, she had to leave Sherwood after only 3 years. She started taking any job she could find, anything to help her family eat. Years later, she would say that quitting music might have actually saved her life. She hadn't failed. She had just redirected herself towards something even better, something she didn't even know was coming. In 1935, she tried college again. This time she studied music education at a place called Bluffton. But by 1937, she left again, and this time it was because she got married. For years afterward, she would regret giving up her dreams for a man. But comedy had plans for her, whether she knew it or not. In 1940, Phyllis and her husband Sherwood moved to Ypsilanti, Michigan. Sherwood had gotten a job at a bomber plant. Money was super tight. Their first son, Peter, was born that same year on September 27th. America was deep into World War II, and families had to survive on just $25 a week. That's barely anything even back then. That financial pressure, combined with being a brand new mother, pushed Phyllis into something called postpartum depression. It's when new moms feel really sad and overwhelmed after having a baby. Between 1940 and 1945, Phyllis and Sherwood moved at least 8 different times. Can you imagine packing up your whole life 8 times in 5 years? They finally ended up in California, where Sherwood got work at the Alameda Naval Air Station. But money was always tight, always stressful. And Phyllis was the one holding the entire family together. She found comfort in something simple: radio shows. While she was doing housework, cooking, cleaning, taking care of baby Peter, she would listen to voices on the radio telling jokes and stories. Those voices planted a seed in her mind, a seed that would grow into something amazing. Her second child, a daughter named Sally, was born in 1944. Around this same time, Sherwood was unemployed a lot. So Phyllis took a job as a newspaper editor to keep food on the table. That experience with words and writing would become her secret weapon later in life. In 1953, they almost lost their home completely. Most people would have given up right there. But instead of breaking Phyllis, that moment somehow became the beginning of everything. She was 37 years old, and her comedy career was about to start. But before we get there, I need to tell you about the tragedy that nearly destroyed her. In 1945, Phyllis gave birth to a baby boy. Some records say they named him Perry. Other records say he died before they could even give him a name. He lived for just 2 weeks. 2 short weeks, and then he was gone. It absolutely broke Phyllis's heart into a million pieces. Doctors believed the baby died because he was born too early, and the medical technology back then wasn't good enough to save premature babies. They were still living in Alameda, and Sherwood had just lost his job again. Everything in their life felt uncertain and scary. Phyllis was only 28 years old, and she had just lost her baby, so she turned her pain into action. She started joining local theater productions in San Francisco. Performing on stage gave her a place to hide her grief from the world. But the heartbreak didn't stop there. Not long after losing her baby, she suffered a miscarriage. That's when a pregnancy ends too early and the baby doesn't survive. Over the next 10 years, Phyllis would go through 6 pregnancies total. Only 5 of her children would survive. Can you imagine carrying that much loss, that much pain? During this terrible time, she started writing again. She would submit articles to magazines and newspapers for just $2 each. $2. And all the while, she was hiding her grief behind a smile that nobody could see through. Between 1946 and 1950, Phyllis gave birth to 3 more children: Suzanne, Stephanie, and another son who she also named Perry. That brought the total number of living children to 5. But while her family got bigger, their bank account didn't. Sherwood refused to take jobs he thought were beneath him. He even wasted a $10,000 inheritance that could have saved the whole family from poverty. They lived on food stamps. They could barely afford powdered milk. Phyllis was earning just $15 to $20 a week writing for tiny local papers. Life was incredibly hard. She had 5 kids under the age of 10. No help from anyone. No family nearby to support her. But instead of falling apart completely, she turned it all into material for jokes. Her future comedy would be packed with stories about lazy husbands and chaotic motherhood. But back then, when she was living it, none of it felt funny. It felt like she was drowning and nobody could hear her screaming for help. By 1952, things got even worse. They were evicted from their home because they owed $300 in unpaid rent. Imagine being kicked out of your house with 5 young children. Where do you even go? That same year, Phyllis finally got her first consistent paycheck. $75 a week working as a radio copywriter at a station called Kiarao in Oakland. That job literally saved them from being homeless. She created a 15-minute radio segment called Phyllis Diller, the Homely Friend Maker, where she would poke fun at housewife tips and tricks. The name was silly, but it gave her a voice that people started to recognize. Sherwood had been pushing her for 2 years to perform on stage, so she finally tried it. Her very first show was at a veterans hospital, and she bombed completely. The patients heckled her while she tried to play piano. They laughed at her, not with her. It was humiliating, but she didn't quit. Instead, she turned that humiliation into fuel. That same year, she did her first real stand-up comedy gig. Even when they struggled so badly with rent that they had to pawn Phyllis's jewelry, she kept going. She told absolutely no one how hard things really were at home. Then came the moment that changed everything. On March 7, 1955, at the age of 37, Phyllis performed at a place called the Purple Onion in San Francisco. The audience absolutely loved her. She wasn't trying to be beautiful and glamorous like all the other women in entertainment. She made fun of her own looks. She made fun of her cooking. She made fun of her whole life. She joked that her food was so bad it could literally kill you. People couldn't stop laughing. What started as a short gig turned into an 89-week run. That's almost 2 years of performing at the same club. The club made over $100,000 from her shows. And suddenly this exhausted mother of 5 was being taken seriously as a comedian. Her pay was just $100 a week, which doesn't sound like much. But it led to TV appearances by the next year. She had read a self-help book called The Magic of Believing, and she credited that book for finally giving her the courage to get on stage. After 15 years of just being a housewife and mother, she had finally found something that was just for her. In 1956, Phyllis transformed herself completely. She created a stage look that was absolutely unforgettable. She wore a wild wig made of horsehair that stuck out in every direction. She painted her face with exaggerated makeup that made her look almost like a cartoon character. She carried a long cigarette holder even though she barely even smoked. And she wore clashing clothes that were deliberately mismatched and ridiculous. She did it all on purpose. She was nearly 40 years old, and she knew she had to stand out in a big way. Instead of trying to be beautiful like every other woman in Hollywood, she made herself look as ugly and wild as possible. And then she owned it completely. Her bookings went up by 40% almost instantly. She started appearing on national television shows. Her wig collection grew to over 50 pieces, and each one cost $50 to $100. Her signature cigarette holder was 12 inches long and made of real ivory. All of this became part of her legend and her brand. But underneath all of it, she was hiding deep pain from a marriage that was falling apart. She turned that pain into power on stage. On June 15, 1958, Phyllis released her very first comedy album. It was called Like a Lampshade in a Whorehouse, and that title absolutely shocked everyone. Some stores completely refused to sell it because they thought it was too inappropriate. But it sold over 50,000 copies in its first year. Her jokes about a character named Fang, who was supposed to be her lazy fictional husband, were really thinly disguised references to Sherwood. She recorded the album in a small studio in Los Angeles with just 20 people in the room watching her. Her humor was raw and lightning fast. She could deliver up to 200 words per minute, which is incredibly quick. The album made her $10,000 in royalties by 1959, and it landed her even more TV deals. Even the name Fang had a strange origin story. It came from a typo in a script she was reading, but she kept it and eventually wrote over 1,000 jokes about this fictional terrible husband. The success of that album proved that women could be just as bold, just as funny, and just as fierce as any man on stage. And that was revolutionary in the 1950s. By 1959, Phyllis was touring nonstop all over America. She performed at over 150 venues that year, including New York's famous Blue Angel Club. That year alone, she traveled 50,000 miles and made $25,000. That was 3 times more money than she had earned just 4 years earlier. She had a special steel cabinet custom-built to store 50,000 handwritten jokes. Each joke was written on an index card and sorted by topic so she could find them quickly. She would sit at her typewriter after every show and write 100 new jokes every single week. She performed so often and worked so hard that she once collapsed from pure exhaustion after driving for 48 hours straight. But even then, she kept going. She never stopped. In 1961, something really unusual happened on television. A woman walked onto the Jack Paar show on April 5th and changed everything about comedy. She wasn't young and polished. She definitely didn't fit Hollywood's idea of beauty. She was 43 years old. Her name was Phyllis Diller. She had 5 kids at home. She came from a broken marriage. And she had only started doing comedy a few years earlier, when she was already 37. Most people would have given up on their dreams by that point. But instead, she stood under those bright studio lights with a fright wig on her head, a long cigarette holder in her hand, and a loud cackle that made people either burst out laughing or gasp in shock. She didn't try to hide her struggles. She made them the joke. She called herself ugly before anyone else could say it. She talked about her chaotic home life in ways that made people laugh out loud. There was no woman like her on television. Not a single one, and even though she was terrified, shaking so badly she could barely hold the microphone, she kept going. That one appearance didn't just get her noticed. It launched her straight into stardom. More shows came calling. Soon she was on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was the biggest variety show in America. Comedians like Roseanne Barr would later say that Phyllis Diller changed their entire lives and made them believe they could be comedians too. This woman that some people called an ugly duckling had suddenly become a huge star. 5 years later, in 1966, Phyllis took another big risk. She starred in her very first sitcom called The Pruitts of Southampton, which aired on ABC. She played a woman who used to be rich but was secretly broke, and she had to pretend she still had money so nobody would find out her secret. The show was absolutely wild. In one episode, she tried cooking a turkey in a washing machine. Can you imagine? The show even changed its name halfway through the season to The Phyllis Diller Show in January 1967. It only lasted 30 episodes and ended in April of that year. The ratings were really bad. It ranked 77th out of 91 shows that season, but even though it failed, the show earned her a Golden Globe nomination, and it made people realize something important about Phyllis. She wasn't afraid to fail. Not on TV, not in real life, not anywhere. Even TV Guide later listed her show as one of the worst shows ever made. But instead of being ashamed and hiding from it, she just kept showing up and working. Even during the Vietnam War, she went on tour with Bob Hope to entertain soldiers who desperately needed something to laugh about. Around the same time, she found a second home on game shows. In 1967, she became a regular on The Hollywood Squares. Over the years, she appeared in 28 episodes up until 1980. From her little booth in the tic-tac-toe board, she would throw out punchlines that became absolutely unforgettable. One of her most famous jokes happened when she chased a garbage truck down the street and shouted, "Am I too late for the trash?" The garbage truck driver answered back, "No, jump right in." That was Phyllis's magic right there. She made people laugh by making fun of herself in the most brutal ways. People absolutely loved it. She wasn't acting like a fancy star. She was being real and raw, and that made her iconic. Behind the scenes, the show felt like a party. She would tape 5 shows in a single day and made real friendships with the other stars on the show. Fans got to see a different side of her personality too. She couldn't sing well at all. She smoked a lot. She had 6 kids at home and barely got any sleep. But she turned all of that chaos into comedy gold. Even Eddie Murphy said years later that her famous cackle influenced his own comedy style. And she wasn't just making jokes. She was opening doors for women comedians like Ellen DeGeneres, long before Ellen was even famous. Then, in 1968, she got her very own variety show. It was called The Beautiful Phyllis Diller Show, and it aired on NBC starting September 15th. It only lasted 13 episodes and ended in December. The show mixed music, comedy sketches, and celebrity interviews all together. Bob Hope, Goldie Hawn, and Norm Crosby were among her guests. Even though Phyllis couldn't sing at all, she still sang on the show anyway. That was just who she was. She didn't care if something was perfect. She just wanted it to be fun and entertaining. The ratings were bad again, and the show got canceled after just 3 months. But somehow, even this failure just added to her fame and legend. Her bold costumes, huge wild hair, and crazy performances would later influence stars like Lady Gaga decades in the future. That same year in 1968, she toured Vietnam with Bob Hope again to entertain the troops. She also voiced the monster's mate in an animated movie called Mad Monster Party. She was everywhere you looked, even if the TV ratings didn't always reflect how popular she really was. Her film career during the 1970s wasn't huge, but it had some really unforgettable moments. In 1969, she acted in a movie called The Adding Machine, where she played a character named Mrs. Zero. It didn't do well at the box office, but critics were genuinely surprised by how serious and emotional Phyllis could be when she wasn't doing comedy. In 1975, she appeared briefly in the Oscar-winning movie The Sunshine Boys, and in 1977, she had a role in The Great Balloon Race. 2 years later, she appeared in A Pleasure Doing Business. Around that same time, she also took over the lead role in the Broadway show Hello, Dolly on December 26, 1969. She was 52 years old and doing 8 shows every single week. Very few people knew that behind those stage curtains, her home life was completely crumbling apart. Her husband Sherwood, who had been diagnosed with mental illness back in the 1950s, had emotionally left her to raise 5 kids completely on her own. She was working every single night just to pay the bills and keep food on the table. But still, she kept going and never complained publicly. In 1976, she joined a crazy show called The Gong Show, where she would judge ridiculous talent acts and cackle her way through the madness. She also appeared on Match Game PM. Her voice seemed to be everywhere during this time. She was laughing, shouting, playing characters, and she never, ever stopped working. She even appeared on The Muppet Show in 1979 and on The Love Boat multiple times between 1977 and 1986. By the end of the decade, she had over 40 film credits to her name. She even earned more money than Bob Hope on one of their movies together in 1966 called Boy, Did I Get a Wrong Number, because her comedic timing was just that incredibly good. She also made an album during this time. It was called Born to Sing and came out in 1968. It wasn't meant to be serious at all. She made fun of her own terrible singing voice throughout the whole thing. The songs were deliberately off-key and full of jokes, but that was the entire point. People loved it because it was so honest and funny. She mixed music with stand-up comedy in a way nobody had done before. Her track list included songs like Satisfaction and Hello Young Lovers, all done her way with tons of humor mixed in. The album sold okay, but more importantly, it helped her sell out live shows on tour. What very few people knew was that she recorded that entire album while going through absolute hell in her personal life. Her marriage had completely collapsed. She had no money saved up. And here's the part that breaks my heart. One of her daughters, Sally, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and Phyllis visited her every single week for decades without ever telling a single person. In public, she smiled and made everyone laugh. But in private, she was barely holding herself together. That album led directly to her 1968 TV show. And in 1972, she voiced herself in the new Scooby-Doo movies, where she poked fun at psychic readings and fortune tellers. Her fans absolutely adored her. Many of them were from the gay community, who saw something beautiful and brave in her loud colors, wild style, and bold truth-telling. She released over 10 comedy albums in total throughout her career. Each one felt like a little rebellion against what women were supposed to be. In the 1990s, Phyllis became something else entirely. She became a voice actor. In 1990, she played the Mouse Queen in an animated movie called The Nutcracker Prince. It was a Canadian film that completely bombed at the box office, earning only $1.7 million from an $8.5 million budget. But Phyllis's performance as the villain stood out. Her voice, full of wicked laughter and evil glee, made kids laugh and parents smile. She was also in A Bug's Life in 1998, which made over $363 million worldwide and became a huge hit. While her voice work was soaring in animated movies, her personal life was once again filled with quiet heartbreak that nobody saw. Her daughter Sally was still institutionalized in a mental health facility, and by 1990, her son Peter had been diagnosed with cancer. He died in 1998 at the age of 53. But Phyllis kept touring. She kept smiling on stage, and she kept visiting hospitals in complete silence, never telling anyone about her pain. In 1984, Phyllis did something absolutely nobody had done before. She made a home video about plastic surgery, not as a joke but as a real educational video. It cost $39.95 and was called Phyllis Diller's Home Video Guide to Plastic Surgery. In the video, she talked openly about her facelifts, her nose job, and all the other procedures she'd had done. She said it wasn't just about looking better or younger. It actually helped her spirit and made her feel alive. She even joked that her plastic surgeon was so cheap, he had to bite off her earring instead of removing it properly. But this wasn't just funny. This was incredibly bold and brave. Back in the 1980s, absolutely nobody admitted they had plastic surgery. It was supposed to be this shameful secret. But Phyllis said it out loud and owned it completely. She won an award from the American Academy of Cosmetic Surgery for being so honest and open about it. She called herself the Queen of Plastic Surgery, and people actually listened to her. She made it okay for other people to talk about it too. Even Joan Rivers followed Phyllis's lead and started being open about her own surgeries. In 1985, she turned her wild style into an actual business. She released her own line of wigs and crazy clothes. She was 68 years old and turning her jokes into real profit. She sold wigs that looked just like her own wild stage hair. She sold outfits like the ones she wore on stage. Bright colors, loud patterns, unforgettable pieces. She had worn wigs every single day for years because her real hair couldn't handle all the teasing and styling anymore. This business made her a lot of money, and it hugely influenced drag performers and gay fans who saw her not just as a clown or a comedian, but as a true queen. In 1996, when Phyllis was 79 years old, she surprised everyone again. She showed up on a soap opera called The Bold and the Beautiful, playing a character named Gladys Pope, who was a makeup artist full of color and wit. She appeared in 11 episodes, blending comedy and drama in a way that nobody expected from her. People absolutely loved seeing this different side of her talent. What most viewers didn't know was that Phyllis's health was seriously declining during this time. Her heart had actually stopped beating in 1997, and she needed a pacemaker installed in 1999 just to keep her alive. But she didn't stop working. She never, ever did. Then came 1998 and her final stand-up comedy special. It was called Phyllis Diller Still Out for a Laugh, and it aired on NPR. She was 81 years old. Her voice cracked with age. Her jokes about getting older hit way deeper than they ever had before. And behind that famous cackle, there was so much pain that audiences couldn't even see. Her son Peter had just died that same year from cancer. But she didn't let anyone see her tears. She just kept making people laugh like she always had. The special was directed by Greg Barson and included stories from Roseanne Barr and other comedians she had influenced. In a way, it was a goodbye without actually saying goodbye. She kept doing small cameos in TV shows and movies until 2007. And even as her body grew tired and weak, her spirit absolutely refused to give up. Now let me tell you about Phyllis's marriages, because this is where things get really complicated. Phyllis got married for the first time in 1939. It seemed like a regular love story back then. She and Sherwood Diller eloped in Bluffton, Ohio on November 4th. She had absolutely no idea that she would spend the next 26 years pretending everything was fine when it absolutely wasn't. Sherwood struggled with something called agoraphobia, which is when someone is terrified to leave their house or be in public places. He also refused to hold down steady jobs. That left Phyllis carrying the entire weight of the family. She was writing for newspapers, editing articles, doing whatever she possibly could to survive while raising 5 children. One more child had already died as an infant, which I told you about earlier. Even during World War II, while Sherwood barely showed up to his bomber plant job, Phyllis supported everyone completely alone. She never let the outside world see what was really going on behind closed doors. She created that character called Fang to joke about having a lazy husband. But the pain behind those jokes was absolutely real. Behind the laughter, she was hiding gambling losses that Sherwood had racked up. She was hiding emotional abuse. She was hiding quiet poverty that made her feel ashamed. The divorce finally came on September 3rd, 1965. And only years later would she admit how deeply that divorce had hurt her soul. But here's where it gets even crazier. Not even 1 month passed before she married again. On October 7th, 1965, less than 5 weeks after her divorce, she tied the knot with an actor named Ward Donovan. It felt like a desperate, fast escape from her painful past. But this new chapter turned even darker, even faster than before. Within just a few months, the marriage completely fell apart. Ward drank way too much alcohol. He disappeared into affairs with other women. He left Phyllis feeling isolated and alone all over again. She filed for divorce after just 3 months, though they didn't officially finalize it until 1975. At first, she kept completely quiet about his infidelity and all the chaos happening at home. She didn't want any scandal ruining her rising comedy career. But later on, she joked about useless husbands on stage, using laughter to cover up the deep loneliness she felt inside. The truth was that second marriage only lasted 22 weeks the first time around. He was gone more than he was actually there, and the silence that followed his leaving was even louder than his presence had been. Years later, something much softer and kinder entered Phyllis's life. In 1985, she met a man named Robert Hastings. He wasn't her husband legally, but he became everything she actually needed in a partner. They lived together in her big mansion in Brentwood until he tragically died of cancer on May 23, 1996. Phyllis was 78 years old then, and she never remarried after that. In one interview, Robert called Phyllis the love of his life. They would play gin rummy together in the house, just the two of them, far away from all the pain of her earlier years. After so many years of publicly smiling through grief and heartbreak, this relationship was finally real and genuine. She never wanted to go back to legal marriage ties again. That quiet companionship with Robert was more than enough for her. It was everything. But Phyllis's personal struggles definitely didn't end there. And now I need to tell you about the secret, the big one, the one she kept hidden for over 30 years. Her daughter Sally was born in 1944. But by the 1950s, something was clearly terribly wrong. Schizophrenia took over Sally's life. For those of you who don't know, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness that makes people hear voices that aren't there, see things that aren't real, and have trouble understanding what's actually happening around them. Phyllis tried for years and years to manage Sally's illness at home. She tried everything. But Sally was getting worse, not better. Her husband Sherwood wasn't emotionally stable either, which only added more strain to an already impossible situation. Around 1960, Phyllis made the most heartbreaking decision of her entire life. She placed Sally in institutional care. That means Sally went to live in a special hospital for people with mental illness. And here's the part that makes me want to cry. None of this ever made it into Phyllis's stage routines. She kept up the image of being a cheerful, chaotic housewife who joked about everything. But this was too painful to joke about. This was too real, too raw, too devastating. It wasn't until much, much later that fans finally discovered what Phyllis had been carrying all those years. Every single week for over 30 years, Phyllis would get in her car and drive to that institution to visit Sally. 30 years. That's more than 3 decades of weekly visits. 3 decades of seeing her daughter locked away. 3 decades of smiling on stage at night and crying in her car during the day. She never told anyone. Not her other kids. Not her close friends. Definitely not her fans. Sally died in 1993 at just 49 years old. Phyllis had to go on smiling and performing, while quietly losing another one of her children to something she couldn't control, couldn't fix, couldn't joke away. Then came July 4th, 2002, Independence Day in America, a day that's usually filled with fireworks and celebration and joy. But for Phyllis, it turned into something else entirely. Her daughter Stephanie died of a stroke at just 54 years old. Phyllis had helped raise Stephanie's 3 kids after Stephanie's marriage ended in 1973. And now suddenly she was saying goodbye to another daughter. She didn't stop working. She didn't take time off to grieve publicly. She didn't talk about it on stage. But behind her tough schedule and big wigs and famous cackle was an 84-year-old mother who had already buried her son Peter in 1998. She had lost Sally in 1993. And now she was trying to stay standing after yet another devastating hit. Going way back to 1945, she had already endured a different kind of heartbreak when her newborn son died just 2 weeks after being born. That came after a miscarriage which had already shaken her to her core. She and Sherwood had Peter in 1940 and Sally in 1944. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for losing a baby. She didn't speak about it publicly for years and years. It wasn't until her 2005 memoir called Like a Lampshade in a Whorehouse that she finally told the complete truth about that loss. The baby was buried quietly in Lima, Ohio, her hometown. By the time Phyllis passed away in 2012, she had outlived 4 of her 6 children. 4 of them. That's the kind of pain that no punchline could ever cover up or make better. That's the kind of grief that would break most people completely. Her youngest son, Perry, was born in 1950. He had dyslexia, which is a learning disability that makes reading and writing really difficult. That made school a huge struggle for him, and it made home life even harder for everyone. With Sally's mental illness and all the deaths piling up around them, Perry's reading problems felt like just another impossible mountain to climb. But Perry pushed through. He worked hard. He built a successful career in business. And eventually, he became the person managing his mother's affairs and helping her with everything. He was the bright spot in a storm of endless sadness. Through absolutely all of it, Perry stayed right by Phyllis's side. And he outlived her, proving that not every single chapter of her story had to end in heartbreak and sorrow. The 1950s were far, far from glamorous for Phyllis. She was living in a trailer park with 5 young children, barely able to make rent every month. Sherwood had failed at another job, and the family faced eviction more than once. Phyllis would practice her comedy routines in laundromats while waiting for clothes to wash, just to stay sane and not lose her mind. She was 37 years old when she finally got her big break in 1955 at the Purple Onion in San Francisco, performing for 89 straight weeks. It wasn't dreams or ambition that brought her to that stage. It was pure desperation. But she kept going anyway, fueled by that self-help book called The Magic of Believing that gave her just enough courage to try. By the 1970s, Phyllis had divorced twice and was dangerously close to bankruptcy. She didn't show it to the world, but court records told the real story. While Ward claimed he was only making $500 a month, Phil,